Welcome today to our Fairly Killed My Ego virtual boardroom that's been facilitated by HR Recruit and Tom Hines. My name's Jo Thompson and I'm a consultant for HR Recruit. I'm joined today by Tom, who will introduce himself shortly. Tom is going to explore how you can break free from limitations and understand how to invest in failure for you and your business's benefit. If you've got any burning questions during the session, then please put them into the chat box facility and we'll either cover them as we go along or we will have time at the end. I'm now going to hand you over to Tom, who will introduce himself and start the event. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe, and hello, everybody. Great to meet you all. Thank you very much for firing into the chat where you're from. It's great to see you all joining us, and hello to you wherever you are. As Joe said, my name is Tom Hines. My company is called Hinesight. Hope you like the play on words in terms of the name, and we specialise in generally talking about the topics that other people don't necessarily always want to. So I'm hoping that the title of today's session is what might have pricked your interest in terms of wanting to come along and have a little listen around failure and the idea of reframing failure. So let me give you a bit of background as to who I am. So I've worked in learning and development for over a decade in corporate organizations, of which some of them very, very similar to the organizations that some of you work in, I'm sure. I've worked in insurance companies. I've worked in tech companies in the US. I've worked for a cybersecurity company in the Middle East. And I want to let you in on a little secret, actually. A little secret that it generally doesn't matter where you're from, what country or what type of organization you work in. Everyone generally is pretty petrified of failure. Now, you might be thinking, that's nothing groundbreaking, Tom. I'm pretty aware with the idea of failure and the concept of failure. However, one of the main reasons that I started Hinesight was because I was a little bit fed up of talking about the same old topics, if I'm honest with you. Over and over again, we're talking about the same things that make us feel comfortable. So instead, I decided to develop this session called Failure Killed My Ego and talk about topics that really matter in the workplace. And a topic that's actually crippling cultures at the moment, crippling progress and ultimately impacting performance is failure. But we're here today to rip the plaster off of the taboo around failure because failure is uncomfortable. It's personal. And often, as a result, it gets buried. But for HR professionals like a lot of us, it's also actually our greatest tool for creating trust, growth, and cultural change, of which we are so commonly held accountable for in our organizations. So if that's the case, then why are we not using it as a strategic lever in our organizations? Why is that the case? Well, let me start by telling you a little story. And let me tell you about the time when I failed miserably. And as a result, everything changed for me. So I was trying to launch a leadership program for one of the most change-resistant departments in the business that I was working in at the time. So you can imagine the type, very tight-knit, very old school, zero appetite for development, right? And the brief was very vague, to say the least. It was, they need to be better at managing people. Now, that was actually music to my ears because as a creative L&D professional, a blank sheet of paper is perfect for me. So I went in all guns blazing. I designed this brilliant, modern, high-energy, interactive experience. I was buzzing, I can tell you that, right? I even branded it something super slick and punchy that right now would probably make me sick in my mouth. But at the time, I'm telling you, it was so good. It was so bold. It was so out there. It really was going to be an exceptional program that they'd never experienced anything of its like before, right? I was that confident, okay? Except it didn't land at all. And when I say at all, I mean at all. The launch session completely bombed. I could feel it in the room. There was tight jaws, there was folded arms, passive-aggressive comments. And within 48 hours, the whole thing was pulled. The whole thing was cancelled, done. And it really, really stung, not because I thought the content was bad. I didn't. I genuinely thought it was a really, really good program. But because I was so focused on proving the value of what I could bring, that I completely misjudged the culture. I didn't build the context. I didn't bring the leaders in early, and I didn't find out what those true pain points were that they were experiencing. Now, this is schoolboy stuff, really, for somebody in my field, right? I just assumed that they would come along for the ride and that I would then be lauded for my brilliance thereafter. But that didn't happen. I completely failed. And as a result, that failure broke my ego. I was embarrassed. I was defensive. I even avoided walking past their floor in the office out of fear of seeing anyone from that department. But the interesting thing is this, that failure was epic for me. It changed everything. It changed my career because it taught me more than 20 books or podcasts ever could, because it actually broke my ego. And with it, it broke my need to be right, my need to be polished, my need to be perfect. And that's when I truly started growing. So I have a question for you. I have a question for you. Something I want you just to consider. What was the last thing that you failed at in the workplace? And I ask you that question for this reason. HR in particular is brilliant at shielding, fixing, smoothing. But what we've done is we've made failure taboo. And in doing so, we've incidentally robbed ourselves of the very thing that helps our leaders and the rest of our employee base grow, which is vulnerability. Okay? Without vulnerability, we can't have self-awareness. Without self-awareness, we can't have growth. So what we're doing today is, and what I've just been with you there, is vulnerable because I'm putting failure back on the table, not as a red mark, but as a badge of courage. So as you consider what the last thing was that you failed at in the workplace, I want you to consider whether you can find that courage, whether you can take that step towards killing your ego when it comes to failure, and whether you can find that vulnerability in yourself to post it in the chat, to tell a group of your peers, many of which you've never met, about the time when you failed in the workplace. If you can do that, and it's okay if you can't, it's okay. It takes time. But if you can do that, you are taking one giant leap towards killing your ego and towards reframing failure. So I'll leave that with you. I'll let that sit with you for a moment. But when I was designing this session and I was thinking about, right, okay, if I'm going to come to the table and I'm going to talk about failure and I'm going to put it into the conversation, I need to make sure I'm coming with some hard-hitting background as to why you should listen to what I have to say when it comes to reframing failure and the power it can have in the workplace, okay? I can see a couple of people firing in with failures that they've had. So congratulations to you. Well done to you. That is honestly takes huge courage. So well done. But I knew I needed to come with some background, right? And with some like hard-hitting information that's going to make sure that you can really trust what it is I'm saying. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to look at what are the main factors that are preventing us from using failure as a strategic tool for success in our organizations, because it's happening. That's the reality, right? And I came up with, and by the way, I worked with people a lot smarter than me to come up with these three blockers because they are underpinned by psychology, right? I've been so fortunate in my career to study quite a lot of psychology, and it's something I'm incredibly passionate about. So it's easy for me to really lean into the psychological elements behind why we might do or not do something. And when it comes to failure, I wanted to get behind the psychology behind it and truly understand why is it that we fear failure so much? Why is it that we can't use it to our advantage? And these are the three things that I was able to establish working with some super smart people, right? Number one is this: deep conditioning around success and perfectionism. Deep conditioning around success and perfectionism. So what that means is many professionals, especially in traditional corporate environments, but not explicitly limited to, have been conditioned over decades to equate success with perfection and control. Because what we're taught and what we're convinced of is that failure equals weakness. And as a result, there's no psychological safety built around getting things wrong. Now, when that's the case and that's the culture and environment we operate in, it makes it incredibly difficult to see failure as anything other than that, weakness. The second psychological blocker and barrier towards us reframing failure is ego attachment and identity anchoring. And this one is so difficult for people to get on board with because of that word ego. It makes people feel so uncomfortable. And I get it. I get why. I get why. So ego attachment and identity anchoring, what does that mean? Well, what that means is when somebody has built an identity for themselves on, let's say, as an example, being known as, a fixer, or the expert, the reliable one, something like that, right? What failure can do is it can threaten that self-identity. It can threaten what you've convinced yourself you are, what you've built an anchor around, okay? Because what happens is our identity, our ego, our subconscious mind, remember I told you this is underpinned by psychology, so go with me, it can panic if we try to challenge it to be something else. If we try to contradict it to be something else, it can panic and it can literally act as a blocker for us. It can say, nope, that's not who you are. You're reliable, therefore failure is not acceptable for you. The prospect of failing is not acceptable. It does not work for you. So that's our second thing, anchorage around our own identity. And then the third thing is systemic pressure and fear of consequence, right? So people don't fear failure in theory. We fear the consequence of failure. And that consequence we can sometimes catastrophize. It could be, I'm going to lose my job. Job loss is probably the single biggest contributing factor towards fear of consequence. The fear that we might actually lose something that's so critical to our life means that we avoid failure at all costs. The second thing is maybe judgment. How will I be perceived? Is this a threat to my credibility, to a brand that I've worked so hard to build? Maybe it's fear of exclusion. Maybe it's a fear of missing targets. Whatever the case may be, that fear of consequence drives it. And as a result, the system doesn't feel safe to failing. The system doesn't feel safe to failing. Now, what I want you to do for me, and again, I can see some more failures coming into the chat, and I want to give a massive shout out to you all for doing that. So thank you so much. And I want you to use the chat again for me. What I want you to do is I want you to fire a number 1 into the chat if you believe that at any point you could have been or are being impacted by number 1 on screen, deep conditioning around success and perfectionism. So if you believe that the way in which you have been conditioned to view failure or to view success is acting as a blocker for you now, in the past, or might in the future, stick a number 1 in the chat for me. And I'm not surprised at all to see those ones flying in at pace. Now do the same thing again for me now, but do it for number 2. If you think that the identity that you've built for yourself, the way you've anchored your personal brand, could get in the way of you taking intelligent risk or of you viewing failure in a different way, stick a number 2 in the chat. And again, I can see them flying in. Heather's even thrown in exclamation marks. Heather's feeling that hard. That's hitting hard. Thank you, Heather. And then finally, you know what I'm going to ask you to do? If you think number 3 is getting in the way, stick a number 3 in the chat. If you think the pressure around failure, the fear of consequences getting in the way, this one might be coming in at the highest rate we've seen so far, because it's absolutely our reality. The fear of consequence, the fear of systemic pressure, it's driving us away from the single most important thing to innovation, to growth, to cultural change, to leadership. Interesting. So what that shows us is that so many of us are being impacted by at least one of the three most substantial blockers to reframing failure and to leveraging failure as a strategic tool for us in our organizations. At least one. But the reality is the majority of us are being impacted by all three. But there is some good news. Promise, there is some good news. That good news is that with intention, with self-awareness, and with vulnerability, and with a little bit of courage, we can change that. And you've all taken one giant stride towards doing that already by just coming along to this session today. So seriously, congratulations, because you have taken a massive, massive stride. There was a significant number of people that were scheduled and registered to come on this session today that were unable to make it happen for whatever reasons. But for any of those people where they couldn't take the leap, they are one step behind you in using failure to your advantage in your organization. So well done to all of you for doing that. Now, I want to bring it to life. I want to make it relatable for you. So when I was thinking about this session, designing it, I was thinking about how am I going to do that? I wanted you to look at one of the most common screens that you probably look at on a daily basis in your organizations. Now, you might not use Teams, you might use Slack or whatever the case may be, but we're going with Teams. So I want to get super real for a moment. All right. Now, this is Pavel. Pavel is the operations director. You work quite closely with Pavel in your organization, okay? And you actually find out that a recent initiative that you led, that you championed, has completely flopped, okay? Engagement's low, and it was sponsored by Pavel as well. Now your boss has found out about it, and your boss is panicking about how it looks. Pavel has reached out to you via Teams and wants answers. So you get this message come through from Pavel. Sounds like the recent wellbeing initiative flopped. Engagement is suffering big time. What on earth happened? Now, what do you do in this scenario? What do you do? Now, I've got two options that I want you to choose from, right? But before I give you those two options, I want to tell you this. There is only one correct answer here, and it isn't one or the other. It's the truth. Remember, self-awareness, vulnerability. Don't tell me, don't fire into the chat the answer that you think I want to hear or that you think your peers need to see you saying. Just go with the answer that is your reality of how you would actually handle that situation. So that's our situation. Now, do you package it up as employee resistance? So they were just never on board. They weren't open-minded to it. And then maybe just like reposition the plan, maybe consider a tweak and just really try and avoid rocking the boat. Do you do that? Do you go with A? Or do you go with B, where you own the failure publicly? You initiate like a learning session where we're really going to, with Pavel and with your team, where you're really going to lean into trying to understand and explore what happened and what went wrong, even if it exposes your shortcomings. It could highlight you as failing. Now, fire into the chat for me. Do you go with A, the path of least resistance, or do you go with B? And if the answer is A, that's okay. I want your current reality. Now, I'm seeing loads of Bs come flying into the chat box, and that is so curious to me, because we're not seeing a lot of Bs in the reality of our workforce. We're seeing a lot of people that want to be the B, that want to choose option B, but we're not seeing enough people choosing it. And it's not a reflection of those individuals. What it shows us is that people don't feel like they have the courage, or they operate in an environment or a culture that would reward them for choosing that difficult option. So that's why we see a lot of option A being chosen. Angelina says, A followed by B after reflection and a cry. Very nice, very good. Nothing wrong with a little cry after a difficult moment. And Naomi says, choose the B and be told by Pavel no. Yeah, that's an interesting one, Naomi, because that could be a reality, couldn't it? You could say to Pavel, right, well, let's truly learn from this. Let's go public with how this failed. And Pavel goes, well, no, I'm not putting my neck on the line for that. And that could well happen. But remember, this isn't about Pavel. This is about you. This is about what you're trying to drive. This is about what you're trying to change. This is a culture that you're trying to lead. So ask yourself this question. What drives that choice between A or B? Is it ego or is it impact? Remember, don't be offended by the word ego. Don't be offended by it. It's not used as a criticism. But are you straddling that line between self-preservation and cultural leadership? Where is that line? Can you see it? Is it visible? How far away is it? How do I know when it's there? That is a line that only you can choose where it is, but you can bring it exponentially further forward to you by choosing cultural leadership, by choosing to publicly own failures, by choosing to learn from those things, by choosing to lead culture. But with all of that in mind, why do we even fear failure in the first place then? What actually happens? So one of the things it does is it really threatens our identity. We've already talked about that in terms of identity anchoring. We've already talked about the fact that it can expose our ego. That's reality. It can also challenge our perceived competence, which I think in particular for people that operate in a HR world, where like trust and expertise are essentially the currency of a successful HR function, or so it's perceived, it can be really difficult for us to see failure as anything other than what we've been taught it to be. And especially for HR organizations or HR business functions that work closely with the organization, that partner with the organization so closely, we might even fear failure in a triple. So we might fear failing ourselves, we might fear failing the business in terms of what we're trying to achieve, and then we might also sometimes fear failing by association when we're backing a leader or we are accountable for partnering with a part of the business that fumbles. Okay, so we might even fear failure as a triple threat. Okay, and that is a hell of a lot of associated risk. So no wonder we fear it. No wonder we fear it, right? Wrong. Check out the image on screen. Now, you've probably seen iceberg analogies before. I am no genius that came up with this concept. However, this one is very poignant for failure, in my opinion. So above the surface, we've got our polished HR professional. Okay. Never wrong, does everything by policy. Okay. Remember, there's a lot of governance in HR. So we're able to lead with policy. We remove ambiguity. Okay. We always show up. We're always consistent. We're an expert in all things people. And we might be risk averse, but we're very, very steady. Very, very steady. So that's what people see as a polished HR professional. However, what might actually be going on under the surface, I wonder? Well, what you might see or not see is a fear of judgment. You might see imposter syndrome. You might even see a need to protect the leaders that you work so closely with. Interesting. So I have a question for you, and I want you to use the chat box for me again, and I want you to fire a Y, a capital, no, it doesn't need to be a capital, but fire in a Y, the letter Y for yes, if this applies to you. So Y for yes, if you have ever held back from challenging a lead. Right, loads of Ys coming in. Pre me asking my question because I've not positioned it well enough. But I've just failed in the flow of this session. So we love that. Okay, a great learning moment for me. So I can see that there's loads of whys because you're answering that in response to the analogy of the iceberg. So it makes complete sense. So, and we can see that loads of people are recognizing what's happening under the surface. This is happening to you. Okay. Not to Philip. That's good. Happy for you, Philip. That's awesome. All right. So now a Y for yes in answer to this question, right? And the question is, have you ever held back from challenging a leader or anybody in the business? Could be your line manager, could be a peer, could be HRD, CPO, could be ops director, could be anybody in your organization. But have you ever held back from challenging them in the fear of getting it wrong, even though you know that you should? even though you know you should, even though you know that you have a valid challenge to make, but you hold back from posing that challenge through fear of getting it wrong. Amanda says, yes, sat on the fence. Absolutely. I can picture it now, right? I've been there myself. You sit in a meeting room, somebody says something, and you think, do you know what? I actually don't think that's the right play at all. I see that completely differently. I think actually I have a really good perspective to share. But that was the HRD that just said that, or that was my line manager just said that, or I am surrounded by a group of peers and now my imposter syndrome is coming in, it's kicking my ass saying, you can't say that. How will you be perceived? How will you be judged? And so you don't. And so you don't. And I can see loads of people flying in saying, yes, they absolutely do that. And it has happened to them. Chloe says no, more in fear of being told no, which usually happens. So it's less for Chloe around the fear of how that might be perceived, that judgment, how the idea might be taken or whatever, but more because there's already a feeling that it's just going to be shut down, which is a whole nother conversation altogether. Philip says held back when the person getting the feedback is a bully. Wow. Wow. I'm sorry to hear that you've experienced that, Philip. That is awful. And Joe being seen as a troublemaker. Wow, that is incredible. Being seen as a troublemaker for having a different perspective. Interesting. Okay, so if we are holding back from challenging through the fear of getting it wrong, for the fear of failure, the fear of perception, of judgment, and our imposter syndrome, and all of that stuff, right? What could the cost of that be to you? What could the cost of holding back be to you? Use the chat box and fire into me what you think the cost of that could be to you. Rachel, integrity breach. Wow, that is powerful as hell. Rachel, thank you. Yeah, you could be breaching your integrity of what's important to you. The values that you lead by could be being compromised by not saying anything. Philip says, yeah, lack of fulfillment, being demoralized. Angelina says disengagement. Absolutely. It makes you feel like crap. Phil says confidence loss. Emma says seen as incompetent, right? These are all things that not challenging are costing you. They're costing you. Huge cost. Now, if I ask you, what could the cost be to the business? Okay, let's go business mindset. Let's go strategic for a second, right? Let's go commercial business acumen for a second. Oh my God, I just threw out so much jargon in the space of 10 seconds. I made myself feel slightly nauseous. So forgive me for that, right? But what's the potential cost to the business? And Anna's fired in tribunal claim. Love that. What a great example. What a great example. Rachel says financial. Yes, it could be huge loss of business impacted by you simply not speaking up through fear of getting it wrong or perceived to be getting it wrong. Emma says reputational damage. Absolutely. Absolutely. So we can see there's some sizable costs that are happening to both you and the business that you operate in through simply not being able to speak up through fear of failure. Now, how do we shift that? I want to talk a little bit about moving HR to the table because this is something that you might hear a lot. It's something certainly that I've heard a lot through the organizations that I partner with, right? We want HR to be strategic. We want HR to be commercial. We want it to be not a cost to the business, but a money maker to the business, which I would argue HR already is. But that's another conversation, okay? We want HR to have a seat at the table and carry genuine impact in the strategic direction of this organization. That's what we say, right? But here's the thing. We're going to really struggle to create change. And let's think about what we're trying to do with failure here. We're trying to create cultural change, right? We're going to really struggle to do that if we're stuck in the realms of being a doer. Okay. Now, HR is unbelievable at doing stuff, getting stuff done, better than any function of an organization I've ever seen. Okay. So I want to put that to the test a little bit. I want you to take your phone out and I want you to scan the QR code that you can see on screen. Okay. Trust me, this is safe, I promise. Now, what you'll see is it will load up almost like a sort of like a bingo card. Okay. And you'll see that it's split into two halves, doer versus creator. Now, what I want you to be able to, you should be able to do, okay, I say should. Tech doesn't necessarily always go to plan, but you should be able to click on, I think there's three dots in the top right-hand corner. Certainly if you're using an iPhone, you should see three dots. If it's an Android, it might show up slightly differently, but you're basically looking for a section that says, or gives you the opportunity to download it, okay? As I say, don't worry, it's safe. From there, it will ask you where you want to save it. Just want you to hit save to your files and hit save. Then navigate through your phone to where your files are stored. The easiest way you can do that on an iPhone is by actually searching on your iPhone for files, and then it will come up as like a blue folder application. And in there, you should see the document. If you don't, you can search for bingo and it should come up. Okay. What I'll do is actually, no, I won't, it's not letting me. I was going to copy and paste those instructions into the chat, but it's not letting me. Okay. But don't worry, don't panic if it's not working for you. Now, once you've opened it up in your files, you should see a little pen icon at the bottom of your phone screen. Okay. That gives you the option to then edit what you see on screen, like draw what you see on screen. And that's what we want to do. But don't worry, if it's not working for you, then there's an alternative workaround. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to read out some workplace behaviors, okay? And your job is very, very simple. Very, very simple. If you hear me say something that sounds like you, then I want you to cross it off. If your technology has not played ball, that's okay. Instead of crossing it off, just try and keep a tally of how many you hear me say that sound like you in the doer section, and then how many sound like you in the creator section. You can just tally that down on a piece of paper, or you can just keep it in your mind, whatever the case may be. Now I'm going to read out these workplace behaviors, okay? Mark them off if they sound like you, keep a tally if they sound like you. There's no judgment. Remember, no judgment. This is just about self-awareness. So remember, what self-awareness gives us is growth. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to read a few out. Seek sign-off before making decisions. You think that sounds like you? See if you can find that on the sheet, on the bingo card, and cross it off, or keep it tally. Next one. Owns the people strategy like a business owner, not a policy enforcer. Yeah, that sounds like you. Cross it off. If it doesn't, leave it alone. Challenges the brief to align with what truly will solve the problem. Sounds like you. Scratch it off. Put across to it. If it doesn't, leave it alone. Sends long emails instead of having strategic conversations. Drowns in admin because it feels like helping. Encourages experimentation even if outcomes are uncertain. Pushes for cultural change even when it's politically sensitive. Avoids difficult conversations with business leaders. Focuses on process and policy adherence over outcomes. Pushes leaders to rethink people decisions through coaching questions. I think we'll have one more. Avoids challenging senior leaders' thinking. Okay. So, what are you seeing? Are you seeing more doer? Are you seeing more creator? Or are you seeing a messy middle? Are you seeing a messy middle? Fire into chat. Are you seeing more doer, creator, or messy middle? And it's okay what the answer to that question is. The only correct answer is the truth. So where I came up with the concept of that is I was listening to a podcast Okay, you're probably familiar with it, you've probably heard of it. I think it's probably the world's most famous podcast at this point, which is The Diary of a CEO with Stephen Bartlett. Okay, and Stephen was interviewing one of his fellow, well, guest dragons on Dragon's Den, a lady called Emma Grede. Okay, a big fan of Emma. I think she's great. And Emma was, well, Stephen asked Emma, what is the best piece of advice you've ever received in your career? Okay. And Emma said the best piece of advice she ever received was actually from her husband, but he wasn't her husband at the time. Emma was the CEO of a company that she founded. And what she said to her husband is, I keep going to the board with these great ideas, knowing that they can make a real difference to this organization. And I'm struggling to get them on board. I'm struggling to get their buy-in. And her husband said to her, that's because you're thinking more like an employee and less like a business owner. And when I listened to that, it really stuck with me. And I thought, do you know what? There is real value and real understanding in that all of us do that. All of us go into situations, sometimes in meetings, whatever the case may be. Think about those times when you haven't challenged when you thought you should. And sometimes we go into these situations and we have these conversations with an employee mindset. I'm just an employee. And actually, the idea of the power behind switching that mindset and saying, no, I am a business owner and I'm a business boss. And what I do has an exponential, significant impact on the performance of this organization can literally change everything. And when I heard that, I was like, there's something in that. And that's why I ran with it. And we need that mindset that Emma talks about. All of us need that mindset. If we want to move from doer to creator, and we want to have that impact, and we want to shift the way that failure is perceived in our organizations, we have to get to that creator space. Now, the honest thing is this: you need a bit of both. Of course you do. There's so much value in that doer space. Of course there is. But what you'll notice in the creator bottom half is that those people are able to challenge, able to influence. They're able to throw out the rule book when it's not working. They coach instead of fix. Whereas people that are stuck in that doer space, they're wired to serve, to support, to say yes. But if you want to influence at the top table, you want to change the way things operate in your organization, which you can do, absolutely without doubt. You've got to evolve, and we've got to be able to find a way to adopt some of those creator behaviors. Because most importantly, creators, they get comfortable with failure. They know that testing bold ideas, that having courageous conversations are the only way you can actually drive change in your organization. And so what I want you to do is ask yourself honestly. Ask yourself honestly. Are you being the HR partner that your business needs you to be? And I'm not talking about HR partner explicitly in terms of being a HR business partner. You can HR in any role, even if you're non-HR, are you being the partner that your business needs? Or are you just being the partner that they expect? Because there's a big difference. Okay. When you find that you're finally ready to move to that creator role, and one of the key ways that you can do that, it's really simple and incredibly powerful, is you can do that by driving a change in your leader's mindset, by coaching them to shift their perception. And when I mention this to people, they go, but I'm not a coach. I'm not a qualified coach. I've never coached. Maybe you've never even been a people manager. So you think, well, how could I coach? Coaching in its simplest form is asking great questions. And everybody can ask questions. You don't have to be a manager. You don't have to be a leader. Everybody can ask great questions. And when it comes to influencing change in the perception, the mindset of your leaders, asking questions is the simplest and most effective way to do that. And so there are three really simple but highly effective questions that you can ask them right now to get them moving into a different space around failure. Okay. So I'm going to give you those three questions. All right. We've started using them here at Hinesight. Some of my clients have started adopting them, not as a tick box, just to disrupt the conversation. Because we often get pulled in after the damage is done, after the burnout, after the performance dip, after the cultural issue. But what if we could get in earlier? What if we started asking better questions? What if we started asking questions that interrupt the thinking of the usual thinking that goes on? What if we can disrupt that? So these next three questions, they're not for us, they're for the people that we work closely with, the people that we partner with, the people in your organization who set the tone for how failure is seen, for how mistakes are treated, and for how people grow. It might be a little bit uncomfortable. Here's number one. What are you doing that your team should be learning from? Number two, what are you doing that your team is afraid to get wrong? And number three, what are you doing that's making failure feel like a threat instead of a teacher? Now, if you had to drop just one of these into a conversation with the people you're working with next week, let's say next week, which one would make the biggest dent in your opinion? So fire into the chat number 1, 2, or 3. Which one would make the biggest dent, or which one would make them squirm the most or feel most uncomfortable? Because that's what we need to try and do. It takes discomfort for change. Now, let me break them down for you a little bit and just shine a bit of a light on why they're so psychologically powerful. So let's start with number one. What are you doing that your team should be learning from? So this question is really about visibility. It's about vulnerability. And we talk about learning cultures, but if leaders don't role model from learning from their own failures, then nobody else will. So it's about saying, if you failed, talk about it. If something's gone wrong, unpack it with your team, not behind closed doors. Because social learning theory tells us that people learn through observation. So if leaders never show they're working, especially when it goes wrong, they inadvertently teach silence and they teach self-protection instead of growth. So question 1 gives us an opportunity to shift that and challenge that. Question 2, what are you doing your team is afraid? What are you doing that your team is afraid to get wrong? This one's really sharp, really holds up a mirror of unintended fear. Because often it's not about what leaders say, it's about what their team sense, right? Or what they see. So a quick flinch when somebody fails, or a joke that lands really badly, or a silent message that mistakes are dangerous to us, right? And this question gently pushes them to consider, what is the vibe that you're giving off that makes people play it safe? Because psychological safety, which is a term that's coined by a lady called Amy Edmondson. If you're not familiar with her work, please, I encourage you to pop Amy Edmondson into YouTube or Google or whatever and have a little read about Amy's work on psychological safety. It's the number one predictor of team performance, right? And fear of failure is the number one killer of it. Because if people are afraid to fail, how can we expect them to speak up? Therefore, how can we expect them to stretch? Therefore, how can we expect them to grow? So question 2 is really powerful for that. And then finally, question 3, what are you doing that's making failure feel like a threat instead of a teacher? So this one flips the failure narrative completely, right? Because failure isn't the enemy, fear is. And we all know that logically, really, but emotionally, most workplaces still punish failure. So this question asks leaders to audit the culture that they're unintentionally reinforcing. Because reframing failure from threat to opportunity, what it does psychologically in the brain is it unlocks our learning systems. Because when failure triggers shame or blame, people will shut down. But when it's seen as useful data, people will level up. Okay. 3 questions for you to consider. Right, as we come to a close, I've got a scenario for you. Okay, it might feel fairly familiar to some of you. Okay, scenario is this. Excuse me, just need a sip of water there. Scenario is this. A director hired a new team member without consulting HR, right? So they've gone off, been a little bit rogue, but they've hired somebody into team. And that individual hasn't been onboarded well. They haven't had any structured support. And as a result, they are underperforming. It's not due to a lack of skill, okay, but it is due to a lack of setup, all right? But now the director comes to you and wants you to manage them out quietly. Manage them out quietly. You may have heard that phraseology before. They want them managed out quietly because they're really under pressure to hit the H1 target. This person is being seen as a drain on time, not as a gain on performance. But you believe you believe that this person could thrive with that right wraparound support, But time is really short. The leader's impatient. You need to influence them without escalating, okay? This is really all about influence. And I want you to consider some questions that you can pose to that director to influence a shift in their approach. So to get them to reconsider managing them out quietly and reconsider how you can turn that situation around so that person is an asset to the organization. I'm going to give you 60 seconds just to do that while I take a quick breather. Quick breather. I've been talking a lot. You've been listening well. Take 60 seconds. Just consider, what questions can I ask that will trigger and influence a shift in approach from my director? Okay. So I'll just give you a little bit of time to think about it. Okay, while they're firing in, I'm going to go to some of them that I can see already. So Rachel, shout out to you. Thank you so much. Have you ever struggled in your career? Some maybe a little bit passive aggressive, but we can reframe that slightly because I really like the intent behind it, Rachel. And someone must have taken a chance on you and helped you get to where you are. Could you do the same here? Really nice, really great at sort of really getting them to think about the situation slightly differently and with maybe more of an empathetic lens. So I really, really like that. Philip, has the individual had all the support they need to be effective in their role? Yes, you're really just shining a light on what the reality is here, right? That this person has not had the support that they needed, which will hopefully trigger a bit of a introspection from the leader as to, okay, have I done right by this individual? So that could absolutely influence them. Gail says, what skills did you see that made you hire them in the first place? Gail, I love this one. I absolutely love this one. We're reframing the narrative with that one, Gail, aren't we? What we're doing is we're reigniting that original intent and belief that this person was a good hire for this organization. So we really like that. Victoria, what made you want to hire them in the first place? What's changed? Yeah, absolutely very similar to what Gail said. What has changed? Andrea says, what attracted them to you in the first place? Are we not able to bring this out? What I really like from that one, Andrea, is the way that you've used the word we in there. So you've made it collaborative, okay? Because that would be great in this situation, right? Remember that ego always plays a part. So what we want to try and do is take the ego for this leader in question off the table. So if we take a more collaborative approach and we ask a question that insinuates a shared lift in supporting this person through the performance issues that they're having, you're much more likely to get that buy-in. Much more likely. So thank you, Andrea. And Amanda says, we could consider extending their probation to enable performance improvement. Recruiting will take time. So you're absolutely giving them a completely alternative solution to the problem rather than just saying yes and just giving them what they've requested. So great one from Amanda. So thank you. So consider how you might be able to influence people to see things slightly differently by asking great questions, all right? And Anna says, can you walk me through the situation? Of course, yeah, we're going to get that background. We're going to get them to articulate it. And what great coaches do is they simply ask questions to probe, to lead somebody towards where they want them to get to. So if you want them to consider an alternative situation, ask questions that are going to lead them towards that. So what you might be able to ask them, for example, is, what might a sort of a stable, supported version of this person, how might that help you actually hit your H1 target? Or what would be the opportunity, what would sort of be the cost of losing somebody who hasn't been fully enabled yet on the rest of the team? Because it focuses reflection on what's really being tested and on their approach to the situation. So there's loads of questions that we can ask, but think about it, it's questioning. We can all ask questions. And it's that creator mindset, moving from doer to creator. We're influencing change. All right. So we're nearly there, guys. Thanks for hanging on. Thanks for listening with 10. I know it can be difficult, so thank you so much. And we're really, really close now. So I just want to recap a couple of things. So we often act like failure is the opposite of success. It's not. I'm telling you now, it's not. And this is coming from somebody who grew up in a household where you were taught play to win, where you were taught if you're not first, you're last. But trust me, my ego was killed, my ego was broken, and now I know it to be different. Failure is the tax that you pay on success. And I'm firstly going to apologize for using the word tax. That is not a topic that any of us are comfortable with discussing currently. However, it is true. It's like the tax that you pay on success. It's a prerequisite to success. Because picture this, so think about this, right? The most successful people in history have all failed. Think about the most successful people in sporting history. There's a great video of Roger Federer. He's talking at a university where he talks about how he actually lost like 58% of the points that he played in his tennis career, yet he's one of the most successful tennis players of all time. So he lost more than half of the points that he actually ever played, yet he's considered one of the most successful people of all time. So he failed over and over and over and over again in order to be so successful. Love that video. If you haven't seen it, check it out. You can stick it in Google, Roger Federer University talk or failure, something like that. You should be able to find it. Now, as HR people, we typically have a really unique window into like post-failure moments as well. So you've got like exit interviews, or being there when a leader makes a mistake, or things go to like tribunal, or maybe there's a poor change rollout, there's a well-being issue, whatever the case may be, right? Yet we often avoid naming it, right? So for us, what's one of the things that we can do that can really help us reframe failure as learning opportunities is the language that we use. So we can do that by swapping out blame language for curiosity language. So like, what did we learn versus what went wrong? So I've got a few examples just to get that ticking along in your mind. So the first one is, we can't get this wrong. How could you reframe that? We won't learn unless we test it. Another one, what went wrong? That's post-failure. Well, what went wrong? What did this teach us? You can see the shift. This doesn't reflect well on us. We might want to reposition that as, this shows we were brave enough to evolve. And let's fix this quietly, which makes me shudder. Let's share what we've learned. So you can just see how we're just reframing that language to a place of more curiosity that's really going to help us influence and shape the way failure is framed in our organizations. All right. So failure isn't fatal, but ego is. All right. Your leaders and your business will only reframe failure if you go first. Because intelligent failure is a tool, it's not a threat. So do me a favor, scan that QR code for one more time. This one's just a takeaway graphic. I want you to screen grab it. Screen grab it on your phone. It will go into your camera roll. Okay, and you can use it as a bit of guidance, as a supporting anchor to help you when failure scares you next time around. Where it tries to get in the way and it tries to block you from doing the right thing, from influencing change, it will only ever be from your hand to your pocket away. It will always be there. All right. So lastly, from me, thank you so much for coming along. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you to Joe for putting us together today. I hope you've enjoyed some of what you've heard. If you haven't, that's okay. I fail all the time. Don't worry about it. Okay. I don't have an ego with failure. If you've got any feedback, you can filter that through to Joe. You can send me a DM. You can ask me questions, however you want. I'll open up to questions in just a second. But you can reach me on my website, hinesight.uk. You can find us on Instagram at It's Hindsight, and on LinkedIn, you can just search Hindsight, or you can search for my name, which is Thomas Hines. You can ping me a DM. You can drop me a message, and I'll be happy to chat through anything of interest. Otherwise, we have loads of topics and loads of sessions that we run in person and virtual that might just get your organization thinking differently. So please reach out if that's of interest. Otherwise, let me finish by asking if anybody has any questions. If not, Joe, I will pass back over to you to close us out.
Thanks, Tom. What I'll do is I'll do the close, and then if any questions come up, then we can answer them. So yeah, thank you. My brain's hurting now. Really great session there. Really enthusiastic. Loads and loads to think about. I think everyone's going to be thinking loads this afternoon. So I'll send out some correspondence to everyone that signed up for the event. And I put a post on LinkedIn. So if you'd like a copy of the follow-up information or the recording, then please put a comment against the LinkedIn post. Our next event is on Tuesday, the 8th of July, and is called Measuring What Matters, Using Wellbeing Data to Drive Organisational Performance. A link to sign up for that event will be included in the email. If anyone's recruiting, we've also got accountancy recruit, FD recruit, exec recruit and charity recruit within the group. But otherwise, I'd just like to say a massive thanks, Tom, for your time and effort in putting the event together, and to everyone for tuning in. I'll just go back and see if we've got any questions. No, there's nothing there.
All right. Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. Thanks, guys. Enjoy the rest of your
Cheers.
week. Hope we see you
Thank
again
you.
soon.
Bye bye.